I would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people who are the traditional custodians of this land. I would also like to pay respect to the elders both past and present of the Wurundjeri Nation and extend that respect to other Aboriginals present.
UN Secretary-General has described climate change as the defining challenge of our generation. Climate change is a threat to our species that adds many stresses to our society, from shifting weather patterns that can threaten food production to rising sea levels that increase catastrophic flooding. The majority of the international scientific community accepts human impact on global warming, and nearly all agree that we must stop and reverse the process. In 2015, world leaders united to reach a milestone agreement to combat climate change. The UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Peoples has acknowledged that Indigenous peoples are among the first that will face the direct consequences of climate change due to their dependence on the environment and its resources. Many were hopeful for the inclusion of Indigenous peoples in the Paris Climate Talk, with groups travelling across the world to attend the conference. However, the UN has come under criticism from Carnegie Council, among other organisations, for sidelining Indigenous peoples at the conference. According to Carnegie Council, the groups were given limited access to voicing their concerns at the conference. The final agreement has no binding clauses for the protection of Indigenous peoples or the promotion of Indigenous knowledge at the international level, ultimately failing to emphasise the significant role of Indigenous peoples in climate change.
The Australian government has shown little recognition towards Indigenous communities and the impact they have felt regarding climate change. There's been little engagement towards policy making, climate change negotiations, and the development and application of adaptation strategies, which are highly essential. Through the lack of engagement and participation, the human rights of Indigenous Australians may be severely impeded. It has been recommended by experts that have followed the issue over years that the states must provide human resources as well as financial in order to convey the message in both English and local Indigenous languages about the projection of climate change and the impacts that they may face.
In response to the lack of participation that Indigenous Australians have had in global and national climate change debates, a 2010 project set up by academic researchers from James Cook University established participatory workshops with the Injinoo and Gurungun communities of far north Queensland. The main focus of the workshops was to understand how the values and cultural heritage sites of these communities would be affected by climate change. This is an area that has received little attention in both academic and government debates, where knowledge of climate change is limited to discussion of threats to coastal tourism. Therefore, the workshops aim to carry out conversations with traditional landowners about what they valued most about their terrestrial and marine ecosystems in terms of the food, medicines, recreation, and oral histories they provided.
As discussed, lack of participation regarding climate change within Indigenous communities leads to a lack of understanding and engagement. The Australian government needs to step forward and take action. Thus far, they have made no real attempts to include Indigenous communities in the conversation. Cultural understanding of these communities must also be taken into account when setting policies. Academic communities have researched and addressed climate change in communities like Indigenous, whom feel they are ill-equipped to deal with changes that are going to arise due to climate change.